Welcome back to Power in South Africa. I'm Chris Bishop. Now we're getting slowly to the end of the year. People are starting to look forward to 2020 to see what lies in store for the business world. Now, according to the 2020 RiskMap report, most of Africa's challenges to foreign investors are risks from elsewhere in the continent, and not because of global markets, but for other factors. I'm joined in the studio by Seamus Duggan, the Senior Analyst at Control Risks for More. So what would you say are the top 5 risks on this continent as we speak?
Well, I think, thanks very much, Chris. Traditionally, security risks and integrity risks has always been the standard problems in Africa. But what we've seen over the last 4 to 5 years in particular is that the global risk landscape has changed. So you can no longer point at Africa and say, there be dragons. You now have to consider Africa in a global context. And so our 2 top risks, I think, are the most relevant to Africa. One of them actually represents an opportunity, I think, and the other one is more of a challenge for companies. So, briefly, Control Risks, every year we produce this Africa Risk Map, as you said, and alongside that we produce an Africa Risk Reward Index. So we're very keen to stress risk and reward. The top one at the moment, not a surprise, US political dynamics. What that means is an increasingly volatile and unpredictable foreign policy under Donald Trump. And that links to one of our other risks, which is a lack of kind of long-term strategies amongst leaders, which means that foreign policy decisions are becoming more erratic. And now that has all sorts of implications. You were just discussing some of them now with your previous guest. Global trade, for example. But I say it's an opportunity for Africa because Africa is relatively disconnected from global financial markets. And often in these sort of global times of trouble, you see more money flow into Africa. So top global risk, but for Africa, it's not looking too bad. The second one that I think is a problem for Africa is that globally we're seeing a rise in social activism. Yesterday, Hong Kong had one of its biggest protests. A couple of days ago, Paris had protests that have been going on for a year now. And this is very much something we're seeing in Africa as well, across the continent, is an increase in community grievances, an increase in people who want jobs, who want better paying employment. And for businesses in Africa, this is a tricky subject because African governments are struggling with debt, they're facing drought, they're facing low economic growth, and more they're passing those responsibilities for social development onto the corporate sector, onto the private sector. So more and more what we expect, and this is probably one of the general trends you can actually apply to the continent, is that pressure on corporates to sort of strengthen their corporate sociability, to do more, to build hospitals, to build schools. And I think we've just seen that in the last week or so with some new regulations or amendments proposed for South Africa's mining law, which have made very clear that they want to see more from the corporate, from the private sector, and that they're setting more stricter deadlines, stricter timelines.
Doesn't that complicate Africa's future as well? Because, I mean, I've done a lot of work on public-private partnerships. I mean, often they can be very difficult relationships. Yes. I mean, the idea of what the government wants from a project and what the private companies want from the project are vastly different things. How do you see that progressing?
Absolutely, and so sort of your public-private partnerships are one of the natural extensions of these kind of demands on companies to do more. But the public sector is a very tricky space, particularly from an integrity perspective. So I mean, you need to know who you're doing business with. You need to know how that impacts on your reputation. And again, if you look at somewhere like South Africa, that's a significant risk, and we don't see that going away. Necessarily in the short term, it's going to be a persistent problem.
And not only that, I mean, at the moment we're suffering from power cuts here, but I mean that reduces growth, which reduces the amount of jobs and economic activity, which means we have an even bigger pool of young people who've got nothing to lose.
Absolutely. And that again feeds into community grievances, it feeds into social unrest, but Eskom again is a great example of this. It's somewhere where you see risk really having a tangible impact. And I think there's 2 ways that's happening. First of all, it shows you how corruption can sort of bring a utility to its knees by, preventing the necessary funds from being spent on maintenance, for example. And the other side of it is, again, just that lack of maintenance, the way that impacts the power supply, the way that impacts transmission lines, for example. You see very real impacts.
And also, you've done a lot of work in Mozambique, looking at the risks there. There's been a lot of stories written, 1 or 2 by myself, about the energy boom that's supposedly just around the corner. I know gas is being shipped south here to South Africa for some time, but A, how far away is that energy boom, and B, what are the risks that come along with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this has been going on for about 10 years now, since the energy was discovered in the north. It's going to be significant investment. If I had money to spend and I was looking at a 5-year window, Mozambique would be at the top of my list. We expect, some big decisions have been made. Contractors are starting to move in. Construction is starting. It's a complex environment, a complex political environment, a complex security environment. But around about 2022, 23, 24, we're going to start seeing significant revenues as well as significant investment going in. So Mozambique's future is looking very bright.
And how will it manifest itself? Because often it's called the resource curse. I mean, you can argue Nigeria was built on oil, but along with it came a lot of problems, including insurgency in parts of
and so a lot of this is going to depend on how the government and the private sector manages that flow further downstream. But what I will also say is that Mozambique is not just about the LNG projects. It has significant opportunities in mining, in agriculture, in infrastructure development, which all needs to go hand in hand with what's going on with the LNG development. And so I think, for Mozambique to succeed and not fall prey to that resource curse, it's really about developing, diversifying those opportunities across the market. And I think we're beginning to see that already.
Okay, well, it strikes me as always been a risk in Mozambique to business. There's the lack of infrastructure, the lack of finance even on the ground when it comes to developing businesses. How much of a risk do you see there?
Yeah, so infrastructure is a major risk. And to give an example, for the liquefied natural gas projects in the north, the main town is Pemba and the project development is happening up in Palma. There's only really one road that connects the two. It's not in great condition. If there's a heavy rain or if there's some kind of problem on the road, that can disrupt supply lines to this important development. So again, that's something that needs to be worked on, and it is a problem. And on the financial side, I think maybe one of the big benefits of what's going on is that it has attracted international attention. So you're getting far more financing coming in from the global market than you were before. And this is in sort of the absence of bilateral support from governments following the debt scandal in Mozambique.
Thank you very much indeed for your time and insights. That was Seamus Duggan, Senior Analyst at Control Risk. Into a short break. When we come back, a lot more Power Lunch South Africa. Do stay with us.